It was late, the kind of deep night where the city of Columbus, Ohio, finally quiets down. That's when the call came through to Night Shift Unit 47. A voice, thin and cracking with a strange kind of calm, said, "Please send someone. It's my son." For the detectives, sleep was a luxury they couldn't afford. In 15 minutes, they were pulling up to a modest duplex, the kind of house you'd find in any quiet, unassuming neighborhood. This was a place where nothing like this was ever supposed to happen. Inside, the scene was chillingly sterile. The living room was dark, and in one corner, a single, small body bag lay still. It held the remains of 5-year-old Darnell Taylor. He had been dead for hours, but this wasn't a straightforward homicide. The air in the house was thick, heavy with something unspoken, something twisted. The detectives felt it instantly. This was more than just a single, tragic event. They started canvassing the neighborhood. People had heard things earlier that evening. The muffled sounds of yelling, a parent's angry roar, a child's cry quickly stifled. But nobody had knocked on the door. Nobody had intervened. The window of opportunity to save him had been tragically narrow. Back inside, the detectives moved to the kitchen. The scene told a story of its own. Open snack wrappers were scattered on the counter. A few raisins were stuck to the rim of a cereal bowl. A trail of crumbs led from the kitchen, across the floor, and into the little boy's bedroom. On his bed, an overturned box of crackers lay empty, the supposed catalyst for the horror that had unfolded. In the living room sat Pammy Maye, Darnell's 48-year-old foster mother. She was pale, disturbingly calm, with eyes that seemed completely blank. There were no tears, no frantic screams, just an unnerving stillness. Her husband hovered behind her, his body shaking uncontrollably. When a detective asked where Darnell was, she simply motioned vaguely toward the corner of the room. Then, piece by agonizing piece, a confession started to spill out. She said she had suffocated him. The reason? He disobeyed. He was eating snacks in bed. In her mind, that act of childish defiance was a crime worthy of the ultimate punishment. The forensics team pulled on their gloves and entered the bedroom. The mattress was stained. On the wall, they found faint fingerprints, a ghostly outline suggesting a small body had been pressed against it for a long, terrible time. Just then, one of the techs went pale. He held up a small evidence bag. "We found residue under his nails," he said, his voice low. "Traces of force. A struggle." The initial examination of Darnell's body revealed injuries no one was prepared for. Beyond the signs of suffocation, there was heavy bruising on his neck, several broken ribs, and cuts consistent with the sharp edge of a belt buckle pressed into his skin. This wasn't just suffocation. This was a sustained, brutal attack. It was pure rage made physical. In his tightly clenched fists, they found shredded fragments of a snack wrapper, silent, heartbreaking evidence that in his final moments, this little boy had tried to fight for his life. The detectives pressed Pammy Maye again and again. Why? Why would she do this? She claimed she lost control. She described herself as the alpha parent, a firm believer that discipline must dominate all else. She even offered words of remorse, but her face remained a blank, emotionless mask. Her words were hollow, a performance that didn't match the chilling emptiness in her eyes. They pulled security footage from a neighbor's camera across the street. The grainy video showed Pammy walking into the house at 6:45 p.m., carrying a small box, likely the crackers. At 7:10 p.m., she stepped back outside. The timestamp was a little blurred, but the sequence was clear. In that short span of time, something monstrous had happened inside that house. Meanwhile, her husband's statement began to unravel. He said he was upstairs when he heard a thump. He came down to find chaos. He claimed he was the one who called 911, but the detectives heard the tremor in his voice, the questions he wasn't asking. Why did he wait? What happened in that delay between the thump and the call for help? The autopsy would reveal even more horror. The coroner found signs of post-mortem manipulation. Darnell's body had been moved, possibly washed, after he had died. Fibers found under his fingernails didn't match anything in his bedroom. They pointed to a secondary location, maybe a closet. Even more disturbing, his bones showed signs of early decay, far faster than what would be expected in the few hours since his death. It was a clear indication that he had been abused even after he was gone. The detectives reviewed the body cam footage from Pammy's interview. She spoke in a soft, flat monotone. "He had snacks in bed. That wasn't allowed," she explained. "I told him, if you do it again, there'd be consequences. When he did, I snapped. But then, her story took a dark turn. She described hiding his body, driving it to a storm drain off East Brooks and Marsdale. "You'll find him there," she said, looking directly into the camera. "Believe me." As a storm began to brew outside the station, the detectives replayed that last phrase. It wasn't a confession. It was a threat. It was a taunt. But it also told them exactly where to look. Just as they were piecing together the timeline, her confession twisted again. She claimed she later realized he was still breathing after the first attack, so she delivered a second, fatal blow. But the forensic evidence didn't line up with her story. The timing was all wrong. Either she was lying about the second blow, or she had used another, more sinister method. She also claimed she tried to wash the body in the bathtub, but the detectives had already discovered something else. Inside a locked closet, hidden beneath piles of laundry and a discarded mattress, they found a second body bag. It was empty, but it was stained. This was her backup plan. A place intended for Darnell. Had her first plan to dispose of the body failed, it was a chilling confession of her premeditated state of mind. And just when they thought the case couldn't get any more complex, a call came in from a neighboring county. They were investigating a strange matching case. A 6-year-old foster child who had vanished under suspicious circumstances years ago. The foster mother in that case was the same person sitting in their interrogation room, Pammy Maye. The detectives looked at each other, the weight of the revelation settling heavily in the room. They had found one child's body, but had another one simply disappeared? The case had just cracked wide open, revealing a potential history of darkness for deeper than they could have ever imagined. This story is a stark reminder of the hidden darkness that can exist behind closed doors. It's truly heartbreaking. Thank you for watching and for allowing us to share this important story. If you found this content meaningful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more. We'll see you next time. The morning after Pammy Maye's arrest, the sun rose cold and gray over Columbus. Outside the precinct, a media frenzy was already brewing. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust toward any officer who dared to step outside, but they all refused to comment. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, cigarette smoke, and sheer exhaustion. Detectives hadn't slept. They couldn't not after what they'd seen, what they'd found in that house. Detective Carla Jensen, the lead on the case, stared at the evidence board. The photos pinned to it told a silent, gruesome story. Crumbs on the bedsheets. A small, broken toy car. Tiny, desperate handprints on the wall. Every single image screamed rage, a violent, final outburst. But something just didn't add up. The supposed motive, a child punished to death for eating snacks in bed, was too senseless, too shallow. Jensen had seen monsters in her career, but even monsters usually have a reason, however twisted. Jealousy, greed, revenge. This was something else entirely. It felt systematic, planned. By noon, a break in the case came from forensics. They dematched fibers from the crime scene to clothing discovered in a storage unit rented under Pammy's name, located 2 towns away. A search warrant was issued immediately. What they found inside that dim, concrete box froze even the most veteran officers to the core. Plastic containers were stacked in perfect, obsessive rows, each labeled with dates. Some held old children's clothes, others contained toys, notebooks, even crayon drawings. It was a bizarre archive of stolen childhoods. One box held tiny socks, stained with a dark brown residue. Another was filled with Polaroid photos, dozens of them. Each one showed the same little boy, Darnell, in different states of bruising. As Jensen flipped through them, the injuries visibly worsened. It was a visual diary of systematic abuse. Detective Jensen's voice broke as she whispered to her partner. She documented everything, every single punishment, but the most disturbing box was the one simply marked after. Inside, they found plastic gloves, multiple bottles of bleach, and a folded towel that was still damp with a faint, metallic smell. The evidence was chillingly clear. Pammy didn't just lose control in a moment of anger. She had prepared for it. She had a process. Meanwhile, a separate team of investigators was following up on a report from a neighboring county about another missing foster child. The boy, named Kyle, had been in Pammy's care just 6 months before Darnell's death. Official records showed he had been relocated to a different foster home. But when detectives went to the address listed for the supposed new foster parents, they found an abandoned, derelict trailer. There was no family. There was no Kyle. The case was growing darker and more complex by the hour. In the interrogation room, Pammy remained disturbingly calm, almost clinical. Her answers were detached, as if she were discussing a failed recipe, not a child's life. "Children need structure," she stated flatly. "No one ever gave me that when I was little. I was just giving it to them." Detective Jensen leaned forward, her voice tight. A faint, unsettling smirk touched Pammy's lips. "To remember the lesson," she said. The room fell silent, the only sound the low hum of the fluorescent lights above. This wasn't a case of a single, tragic moment of madness. This was ritualistic. This was about control. At that same time, forensics made another terrifying discovery. They had found Darnell's DNA in the trunk of Pammy's car, but it was mixed with someone else's. Another child's DNA, still unidentified. This single piece of evidence changed everything. They were no longer investigating the murder of a single child. They were suddenly facing the horrifying possibility of multiple victims, all hidden behind a wall of foster system loopholes and clerical errors. Jensen drove straight to the local child welfare office, her mind racing. She demanded access to all records related to Pammy Maye's entire fostering history. What she uncovered was damning. Over a 10-year period, Pammy had cared for 5 foster children. 2 had been relocated, 1 returned to birth parents, and another supposedly adopted, but in every single case, there were no confirmation signatures, no follow-up reports, no proof of life. The children had simply vanished into a bureaucratic black hole. The system, designed to protect them, had failed catastrophically. Back at headquarters, Pammy's husband, Greg May, finally broke. Under hours of questioning, his denials crumbled. He confessed that he knew about the abuse, but had been too terrified of his wife to stop it. She wasn't right, he sobbed, his body trembling. She'd punish them for anything. Crumbs on the floor, fingerprints on the windows, for speaking too loud. She said they were ungrateful. "I tried to protect them, I really did, but she always found a way." Greg admitted that after Darnell's death, Pammy had forced him to help move the body. He described how she meticulously cleaned the house with bleach, changed the bed sheets, and staged the scene. And he recounted her final, chilling words to him: "No one will miss him." They never do. Detectives were able to confirm Greg's story with the forensic timeline the specific cleaning agents used, the staged scene, the calculated delay in the 911 call. He was complicit, there was no denying that, but his fear was raw and genuine. Still, fear isn't the same as innocence. By evening, the search for Kyle intensified. Ground teams and cadaver dogs scanned the wooded areas near the May home. Around 9:42 p.m., one of the dogs began barking frantically, alerting near an old drainage pipe behind a derelict factory, just 3 miles from the May residence. When officers lifted the heavy iron grate, the smell hit them first. Then, their flashlights revealed the horror below. A pair of small shoes, scraps of torn pajamas, and a child's skull, wrapped in plastic. The DNA results came back within hours. It was Kyle. 2 victims, both under Pammy's care, both killed under eerily similar circumstances, and both showing signs of post-mortem tampering. The press exploded. The headline on every screen read, "Foster mother turned killer, 2 children dead in snack punishment murders." The community was horrified, not just by the brutality of the crimes, but by the fact that it had gone unnoticed for so long. How many reports had been ignored? How many children had cried for help that never came? Pammy Maye's cold, vacant stare became the face of evil on national news, the woman who killed innocents over crumbs. But the investigation wasn't done. While cleaning out the storage unit, detectives uncovered one final, chilling piece of evidence that would redefine the entire case. It was an old, spiral-bound notebook, labeled Discipline Record 2016. Inside, Pammy had meticulously documented names, dates, and punishments. She'd made notes like, learned the rule, defied me again, and, most ominously, silenced. Some of the entries had red ink check marks next to them. There were 5 red marks in total. They had only found 2 bodies. That meant 3 names on that list. 3 children remained unaccounted for. Detective Jensen flipped to the last page, where Pammy had scrawled a single, bone-chilling sentence. They never listen the first time, but they always listen after. As Jensen closed the notebook, she looked at her exhausted team. "We're not done," she said, her voice filled with grim determination. Not by a long shot. Just then, there was a knock at the door. A uniformed officer stood there, breathless, holding a new piece of evidence. It was a GPS tracker, recovered from Pammy's car. They had just finished pulling its data logs. Its last recorded route, just before her arrest, ended at a remote property 20 miles outside of Columbus, land Pammy had inherited from her late father. A property no one had thought to check yet. And when the team arrived there, beneath the sprawling branches of an old, gnarled oak tree, they found something that turned this horrifying case into something truly unimaginable. It's a stark reminder of the importance of protecting the vulnerable. It was still dark, the kind of pitch black that only exists in the middle of nowhere, when Detective Carla Jensen's convoy pulled up to the rural property. This wasn't a forgotten plot of land swallowed by overgrown grass and whispering trees. The GPS tracker they'd been following, the one from Pammy Maye's car, had gone silent right here, 2 nights before her arrest. The farmhouse looked like a skeleton, window shattered, porch sagging, the front door clinging to a single hinge. But the moment the first officer crossed the threshold, the smell hit them. This wasn't just an empty house. Something, or someone, had been here very, very recently. Inside, a thick blanket of dust covered everything, except for one jarringly clean path, a narrow hallway leading down to the basement. The steps were clean, footprints clearly visible in the dirt. As they descended, the air grew colder, and a sense of dread, thick and suffocating, settled in. Down in the darkness, Jensen's flashlight beam caught the glint of metal. It was a row of small containers, each meticulously labeled with a name and a date. And next to them, a sight that made her blood run cold. A child stuffed bear, its eye torn out, its fur matted with something brown and hard. She whispered, her voice barely audible, "Dear God." Forensics moved in, their sterile professionalism a stark contrast to the horror of the scene. The containers held fragments, bone shards, tiny teeth, buttons from children's clothes. Each one was sealed and dated, spanning several years. The oldest was from 2015. Pammy had been doing this long before her last victim, Darnell. They counted 5 containers. 5. Every red mark in her notebook was now accounted for. But there was something else. A stack of old VHS tapes set beside a dusty television. One tape was still inside the VCR, labeled with neat handwriting, the rulebook. Against her better judgment, Jensen pressed play. The screen flickered with static. Then an image solidified. Pammy Maye, sitting in a rocking chair, looking directly into the camera. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "I was taught that rules make good children," she said with a faint smile. "And when they break them, they must remember why rules exist." She stood up, revealing a perfectly made bed behind her, a plate of cookies resting on the pillow. A small figure entered the frame, a child, their face blurred by the dim, grainy light. Pammy's voice suddenly turned sharp, like a whip crack. "What did I tell you about Crumbs?" Then, she lunged. The camera dropped, the image tumbling into chaos. A piercing scream echoed, and the footage cut to black. Everyone in that basement froze. Even the most seasoned detectives took an involuntary step back, some swallowing hard against the bile rising in their throats. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavier than any sound could ever be. Jensen reached out, her hand shaking, and shut off the TV. She filmed them, she muttered to herself. She wanted to remember it all. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. But the dawn brought no relief, only the grim, cold understanding that this wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. It was a long-running ritual of control, punishment, and twisted delusion. As the evidence mounted, prosecutors prepared to charge Pammy Maye not just for Darnell's murder, but for 5 counts of homicide, child abuse, and tampering with human remains. In court, the proceedings felt surreal. The media dubbed her the snack killer, a chillingly trivial name for such profound cruelty. Reporters packed the benches, and sketch artists worked furiously, trying to capture her stone-cold, emotionless expression. When the prosecutor played the tape for the jury, the courtroom atmosphere shifted. Several jurors wept openly. Others couldn't bear to watch, turning their heads away. Through it all, Pammy sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a hint of pride in her posture. Her defense team argued insanity, claiming Pammy suffered from deep trauma and delusionally believed she was saving the children through discipline. But the prosecution dismantled that narrative piece by piece. The detailed journal, the careful planning, the concealment of evidence, and the video footage, it all painted a picture not of insanity, but of meticulous, horrifying control. The turning point came when her husband, Greg Maye, took the stand. Trembling, he recounted the nights he tried to leave, the threats she'd made against him, the way she forced him to help her clean the scenes. His voice cracked as he recalled her words, whispered in the dark, "If they break one rule, they'll break them all. It's my job to fix them." He broke down, sobbing, "I should have stopped her. I should have saved them." After weeks of gut-wrenching testimony, the jury deliberated for only 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous, guilty. On all counts, Pammy Maye was sentenced to life without parole to die behind bars. She showed no reaction, no tears, no remorse, just a faint, chilling smirk as the judge delivered the sentence. But justice, as it so often does, came too late. 5 children were gone, their lives erased by a system that failed to see the warning signs hiding in plain sight. Months later, Detective Jensen felt compelled to visit the property one last time. She stood under the old oak tree where investigators had unearthed the remains. From a bag, she took out a small, brand-new stuffed bear and placed it gently on the ground. "Sleep now, idle ones," she whispered into the wind. As she turned to leave, her radio crackled to life. A forensic officer had found one more item in the evidence locker, an envelope in Pammy's handwriting, never mailed. It was addressed, "For my next one." Inside was a photograph of a little girl, smiling brightly at a playground. On the back, Pammy had written a single, terrifying word, "Candidate." The case was officially closed, but for Jensen, it would never truly end. Evil doesn't just stop. It hides, it waits, and it adapts. And sometimes, it wears the face of someone who claims to love you. In the years that followed, documentaries and podcasts would revisit Pammy Maye's story, a chilling symbol of trust betrayed and innocence destroyed. But to this day, one question remains unanswered. No one knows where Pammy got that photo of the little girl. Her image didn't match any known foster files, missing children reports, or relatives. This leaves one haunting possibility. There may have been another child, a candidate that the authorities never even knew existed. If this story shook you, remember that real evil doesn't always come with a warning. Stay aware, trust your instincts, and never ignore the signs. And if you think this story was intense, wait until you hear the next one. Subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and join us for more true crime stories that reveal the darkness hiding just beneath the surface. Thanks for watching.